Well, good morning, beloveds. I truly hope that this is the last sermon I will be doing on Zoom with you. I truly hope that in September we will all be together in a room. But anyway, here we go. Several years ago, a friend emailed me with a tongue-in-cheek question. Dear Roberta, he said, I sort of am a Unitarian. Does sort of count in these troubled times? Kindly provide theological counseling for me after you've weighed the evidence. Now, the evidence was genealogical. He had discovered in his family tree a distant relationship to William Ellery Channing. I emailed him back and said, this is certainly an interesting story, but I'm sorry to tell you that nothing about this sort of makes you a Unitarian. Unlike some religions where identity is inherited, with Unitarian Universalism, you must actually choose in. William Ellery Channing himself said of our faith, no one can be excommunicated but by the death of goodness in his own heart. And the obverse is also true. We are a classic voluntary association. We choose into our faith. We choose into a set of shared ethical principles. We choose into a way of being together that is mutually supportive and respectful, that nourishes our souls and challenges our minds and offers us opportunities for acts of kindness and compassion and justice. While we proudly and rightly affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we also know that we are made whole in relationship. We are better together. Our congregations are healthiest and strongest and most effective when the members make an explicit and intentional commitment to each other, when we covenant together. The UU historian Conrad Wright opined that in the free church, it is the covenant that gives form to a group. A covenant, in Wright's words, involves a sense of commitment. Even the freest of free churches needs that much discipline if it is to last long enough to accomplish anything of value in this world. Now, last week in the adult faith formation session, I asked you what promises you would make to future generations at UUC. Surely one promise would be to last long enough to accomplish something of value. Throughout our history, we religious liberals have struggled with the tension between honoring individual autonomy and creating communities capable of accomplishing something of value. Part of the impetus for the founding of the American Unitarian Association, the AUA, back in 1825, was the desire to be as effective as evangelicals had become at that time. The formation of the AUA was followed by a period of unparalleled progressive impact on society known as the Golden Age of Unitarianism. We were active in all manner of social reform movements, from abolition to women's suffrage to public health and education. Walter Hers, in an introduction to his book about the power of covenant in Unitarian Universalism, urges us not to mistake the legacy of radical freedom for a chaotic, anything goes approach to our congregational life. He writes that it is a mistake to assume that embracing freedom excuses us from exercising institutional effectiveness and responsibility. We are, he writes, individual overachievers and institutional underachievers. Now let me repeat that. We are individual overachievers and institutional underachievers. And that has always bothered me. It's a shame to undercut our own effectiveness. Now, the corrective to that is to be intentional about our connections to one another, our covenants. While affirming individual worth and freedom, we need to create effective communitarian structures that make it possible for all of us to experience congregational life that is fruitful, affirming, safe, and effective. Several years ago, I served on the Commission on Appraisal, a nationwide body elected by the General Assembly and charged with studying any aspect of associational life that we thought needed attention. We had undertaken a 4-year study of the meaning of membership in our movement. We noted in our study that community had become something of a catchword in American religion, yet many people who expressed a yearning for spiritual community wanted nothing to do with organized religion. The reality, we wrote, is that you cannot have one without the other, and it is part of the liberal church's job to lead people to that discovery. It is the job of this congregation to lead its members to the discovery that in order to grow your souls expansively and to be an effective force for the values that we espouse, we need to make some promises to each other. Promises that will give form to our shared life in faith. Promises that will ensure that in this flawed, imperfect, all too human community, we can together be better than any of us could be alone. I'm excited to report that the most recent study of the Commission on Appraisal is a study about covenant, and the report has just been published, and we will be taking up and reading and studying that report over the next year, all about covenant. So what is a covenant? Well, here's a definition that I learned years ago while I was in training to be a new congregation startup minister. Covenant is the central unifying promise or commitment that binds a religious community together in voluntary loyalty. It grows from an affirmation of shared needs, values, purposes, and principles. As such, it is rooted in the past, in the tradition of the congregation, and reflects the embodiment of that promise through history. It is a promise made in the present with implications for the future. A central unifying promise binding a community together in voluntary loyalty. Something that emerges organically out of an ongoing conversation about shared needs, values, purposes, and principles, rooted in the particular history of a particular congregation, which is why every congregation's covenant is a little bit different. It will be reflective of the narrative arc of that particular congregation, made in the present with implications for the future. So how does a congregation create a covenant? Well, it is created out of that ongoing conversation about your reason for being. What do you all yearn for? What are you most loyal to? What are you willing to sacrifice for the common good? You tell the stories of your past and you ask yourselves what is to be learned from them, even when the learning is painful. You make room for all voices to be heard, particularly voices from the margins. And then you create and treat that covenant as a living document, not something carved in stone. We don't carve things in stone. Today, I will ask you to reaffirm your commitment to your congregational covenant as it now reads. Perhaps tomorrow or next week or next month, you will begin to rewrite it to reflect new realities and new understandings. There are two spiritual practices essential to the creation and maintenance of a covenant, and those are trust and forgiveness. We've talked a lot about trust in the last couple months. I want to read you something that the former UUA president, Peter Morales, wrote. Reflect for a moment about a time someone put their trust in you. Recall a time when someone believed enough in you to say, I know you can do this. I have complete faith in you. What an empowering message that is. What a precious gift we give when we place our trust in someone else. We talk a lot about the centrality of covenant in our faith, how we are united in covenant rather than creed. Trust makes covenant possible. I cannot enter into a covenant with someone I do not trust. Where trust is strong, a covenant is durable. Where trust is weak, the words of a covenant mean little. Yet there is a strong tradition of distrust in our movement. We were born in rebellion against oppressive religious and civil authorities who had betrayed trust. We have inherited a strong anti-authoritarian streak. Sometimes that is good. Often it isn't. Learning to earn one another's trust and to empower one another is ultimately a spiritual practice. I can only trust you if I am willing to let go of some control. I can only trust you if I stop insisting on doing everything my way. We can only earn each other's trust if we take time to know one another. Trust has to grow over a period of time. It has to be nurtured. Trust is what love looks like when it has matured, when love has deepened, when love aspires to a common purpose. Peter then goes on to give us this advice. The next time you gather with your fellow UUs, ask yourself how much you trust them and how much they trust you. What can you do to grow trust, to empower one another? Together, we can do amazing things. Together, we can create the world we dream of. But we can only do all of this if we learn to trust one another. So you talk together about your aspirations, your disappointments, your hopes, and your dreams. You come together in worship, in teaching and learning, in advocacy, and raking and weeding, in making music. And by doing those things together, you learn to trust each other. And then you create a congregational covenant. Now, I don't know exactly how your current covenant was written, but I'm pretty sure that the underlying questions you asked were something along the lines of, what promises would you like people here to make to you in order for this congregation to be a safe place where you can grow your soul and effectively live out your values? And the other question, perhaps the most important, what promises are you willing to make to others here in order for this congregation to be a safe place for everybody to grow their souls and for all of us to effectively live out our values? The answers to those questions may vary a little bit from place to place and time to time, but my experience is that the essential core of our covenants is always the same. We promise to bring our best selves to this place, to honor the diversity of opinions and experiences among us, to listen as carefully as we speak, and to hold each other accountable for the quality of our shared life and faith. Now, that language about accountability is so important because no matter what the covenant says or how enthusiastically you affirm it, the time will come when it will be broken. According to Tom Shulak and John Morgan, who were the authors of the UUA Mission Covenant Manual, the power of a covenant is its dynamic capacity to confront broken promises, engender forgiveness, reestablish relationships, and renew commitments. No matter how profoundly you trust, no matter how hard you try, you are at some point going to have to forgive yourselves and each other for breaking your covenant. And I can tell you also from experience that the covenant is always much stronger and more real after it has been broken. If, and this is a big if you are courageous enough to acknowledge the brokenness, if you find a way to hold yourselves and each other accountable for the break, not through blame, but through mutual acknowledgement. If you're willing to put aside self-righteousness and make and receive amends. Here's the thing about accountability and covenant. You can't think of it as a weapon to use against people you disagree with. Accountability is much more about taking responsibility for your own words and actions than it is about others. It is about recognizing when you have done harm, whether you intended to or not. Remember the word we learned in our story for all ages, kintsugi? Taking something that is broken and repairing it in such a way that the broken place is made beautiful. There are times when I truly believe that all of life is kintsugi, an ongoing cycle of brokenness and repair and beauty. As we approach the moment for recovenanting, I want to offer you some words of wisdom from Reverend Gretchen Haley. Your church is going to disappoint you. The world is surely going to disappoint you, like all the time. We are all walking wounded and weary from the way this world can and does break our hearts. And what our faith asks of us, what our faith imagines for us, is that somehow, right at the moment when our hearts break, we will find our way to see through that heartbreak. We will stay put, not close off, not run away, not hurt back, but keep on being in relationship, doing what we can to repair the world and each other. Keep on opening our hearts with greater love. And right then, our covenantal UU faith says, we will feel not only most human, but also most whole and most at home.